Okay, so if I ask you to think of a St. Patrick's Day scene, what do you think of? Because I know when I try to picture something like a Christmas scene, I can easily come up with a lot of different scenarios. Maybe it's outdoors at nighttime with decorations and lights, or maybe it's inside with a cozy fireplace and presents. It's just a lot of different things that you can easily imagine and get the vibe of. But now try doing that with St. Patrick's Day, and it's kind of hard. On one hand, it kind of seems like it's cheerful and energetic, but at the same time, it's also mixing together all this Irish folklore, which I don't know about you, but that kind of sounds more magical or mysterious, even. They're kind of opposites, and it just all kind of mixes together to create this weird fusion of nothing. And so that's why I'm kind of now thinking, let's just throw this whole thing in a blender and try to make something kind of nice out of it. And one thing I find very nice are colors. Especially a dark, warm, earthy green, like the one that is commonly used for St. Patrick's Day. But using only green would be like only eating ice cream. It might be okay for a while, but at some point you're gonna die a slow, painful death. So we need more colors. And I think to stick with the general theme of having three primary colors for holidays, like Halloween and Christmas, I'm thinking we should go with, of course, green, then probably orange, since that's also pretty associated with St. Patrick's Day, although I probably do want to dim it down a little bit. And then I'm thinking like a blue color, maybe like a teal, greenish blue, something like that. But to truly see if these colors work at all, I think we need to throw them on a canvas. Well, I think since St. Patrick's Day is primarily green, it makes sense to really lean into the nature element of it. I feel like the nature element is kind of a thing that's kind of lost over time. I feel like of St. Patrick's Day now, I see a lot of green clothes, green outfits and decorations, but I don't just see nature. And nature is green, that's why St. Patrick's Day is green, I think. It's just because of nature. So this really should be a holiday that has a lot of nature to it. And considering St. Patrick's Day is really about Ireland, it makes sense to make the landscape kind of like that. Very lush, very dense, a lot of hills and valleys and old forests with gnarled and twisted trees. I like the idea of the landscape also feeling magical, but not directly magical like there are dancing elves around the place, but just kind of like the landscape that you'd see in real life that although there is nothing directly magical about it, there are just things that are kind of odd about it that makes it feel like there could be magical things just around the corner. Like when a tree grows in a weird way or gets all twisted around. Or like when there are a bunch of fireflies at sunset, or like when there's algae going over the top of a pond and it kind of looks like solid ground. Just different natural things like that. I also imagine the weather would be quite gray. A lot of rain, everything would be a bit damp and wet. The perfect time to see a rainbow. I think that's a requirement for this holiday after all. I also like the idea of there being an activity you actually do. Right now, St. Patrick's Day, it's kind of like dress up in green and get drunk, but I kind of like the idea of it also leaning into the gold element of it more. Like maybe when you see a rainbow, you pick up your metal detector and head outdoors, just in the off chance that you manage to pick up a trail of something shiny. Also, one thing that I feel like would make St. Patrick's Day a lot better is if there's just more things to it rather than leprechauns and gold and rainbows. And honestly, I think there was a super obvious thing that you could add to St. Patrick's Day to make it 1,000 times bigger that I'm kind of surprised I haven't seen. Because what is St. Patrick's Day really about? Halloween is of course about scariness and spookiness. Kind of magical, scary things like witches. Christmas is more about being cozy and celebrating and jolliness, I guess. And I feel like St. Patrick's Day really should be magic. All magical things. Because Ireland really does have a lot of folklore. You only really hear about fairies and leprechauns, but there is a lot more to it. And honestly, I think the reason you don't hear about them is just because they don't look iconic enough. Like, take for example Mr. Puka here. He's got a good name, but he also looks mildly disturbed. I'm sure with a little bit of adjusting, he could easily become quite the handsome fellow. Quite fluffy too. But as he is, he's just a bit too on the menacing side. Or then there's the Dullahan, which actually does have a good design. The problem is, his design was so good that he got thrown into Halloween. So unfortunately, we can't use him. Or then there are the Selkies, which are really just people who wear seal costumes that they can take off. But they also live in the water, so I don't know, kind of like furries, but taken to another level. There's also that myth about the harp, which, I mean, come on, it's just a harp. It's not hard to add a harp to St. Patrick's Day. Just throw it in the background somewhere. Also, on a completely unrelated note, there's an animal called a harp seal. So I'm just kind of thinking, seals, harp seals, maybe there's something you can do out of this. I'm not sure. It just feels like there's a connection waiting to happen here. Really, there are a lot more Irish folklore creatures that you could easily throw into St. Patrick's Day. But I think we should take it a step further. Because I'm not just talking about Irish folklore, but I'm thinking just magical things all together. Fantasy. And I mean, there's another connection here as well. What does Ireland have a lot of? What does fantasy typically have a lot of? Castles. And I think just the landscape of Ireland also kind of fits for fantasy. I don't know, I think just mixing together all sorts of magical entities like dragons, wizards, elves, gnomes, anything like that could easily just fit perfectly with St. Patrick's Day. And in regards to castles again, like it doesn't even need to be like a full working castle exactly. Could also just be like ruins or like, statues. Like a dragon statue, just hidden away in a forest. Now maybe I'm just biased because I do have a tendency towards adding ruins to everything, but I feel like ruins fit especially well with St. Patrick's Day. Also, with the Irish folklore as well, like how I said it isn't really iconic, I do like the idea of trying to make it iconic. Like those creatures I said before, I really feel like they could be made to look quite nice. Although this year I'm a bit too busy to get around to all of them, I did work on improving the leprechaun a bit. Because, see, here's the thing with leprechauns. The way that they are kind of depicted now is kind of weird if you think about it. They're just depicted as these little green guys that go around with gold or something. I don't even know what they really do with it exactly, but they're just kind of people, but in the forest or something. It just strikes me as a bit odd because if you're like in your house and you look outside and you see this little green man running around with a pot of gold, some questions are going to be raised. And so I think it makes more sense if leprechauns were actually more like animals. Because if you see a crow with a shiny object, you don't question it because, they're just an animal. They're being a bit silly. They don't really need a good reason for liking something shiny. They just do. And I really think leprechauns could work like that. Maybe they're like squirrels in a way. They like collecting gold, and they hide it somewhere, and they forget about 90% of it. Then some other leprechaun comes along and finds it, and the cycle repeats. But we need to stop real quickly, because we need music. Well, to start off with, I think the music really needs to sound green. And I don't know if that sounds a bit weird to other people, but for me, I feel like something that sounds green kind of needs to be a bit rough sounding. And one good example of an instrument that is green is actually bagpipes. To me, they kind of sound maybe like a dark green. They're a bit intense. See, that's the problem here. I feel like with the theme I'm kind of coming up with right now, it fits more for it to be slower, calmer, mysterious, of course, magical. Bagpipes are a little bit too intense. So this is going to be a little tricky, because we need to find a way to make music that sounds kind of mysterious, but also has bagpipes in it. And I think the key to making bagpipes work is the same way that I get colors to work together. If I have a really intense dark green, and I want it to feel kind of cool, I need to mix a lot of blue into it. And so I'm thinking we need to mix a really blue instrument with these bagpipes. And a blue instrument to me, as weird as this is going to sound, is a synth. Now I know when you think of a synth, you probably think of like sci-fi, because that's kind of where synths work the best. But as weird as it sounds, I don't feel like it sounds that weird. And so if these two work together, then what else do we need? Well, if we go back to the colors of St. Patrick's Day, then I think we need a kind of orange color, yellow. And for me, I feel like the cola tang actually has a very nice, naturey, tropical sound to it. This is what I'm talking about when I say green feels like it needs to be really, really rough and have a lot of different parts to it. This cola tang feels like there's a lot of different things going on. It's very rattly. I think that creates a nice naturey vibe. But I do think we need a bit of a pinch here, something a bit sharper than the other things, something to really capture that wilderness feeling. And I think that needs to be a steel string guitar. To me, the sound kind of sounds like the sound a dragon would make if you poked it. It's just so hot and warm, and I don't know, maybe it's a little too sharp for this, but I feel like it could work. So, with these instruments, I'm now going to do my best to make something that sounds like St. Patrick's Day, but mysterious. Let me know what you think.